Yes. And they've been talking for quite some time about the USMCA, about NAFTA, and the dangers behind both of these. And I'm really happy to have Mr. Thompson on to explain to the audience the dangers of these multilateral trade agreements. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Thompson.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
We've had the New American point out they've had the text, the entire text. If somebody wants to read all 2,500 pages of it or whatever, it's close to that. I've got the exact number of pages, 2,325 pages. So if you want to read all that, you can find that at the New American. You can also get summaries of it, but give the audience an idea of what the fundamental problems are with this trade agreement. It's more than a trade agreement, right?
Yes, it really is. And it first of all, it places us under the United Nations completely and its covenants, and includes in there that we will adhere to the WTO, the ILO, and lost the Law of the Sea Treaty. We never have ratified the Law of the Sea Treaty, which gives the United Nations control of all our shores, our oceans, our rivers, and that sort of thing. Because it was so onerous, they couldn't get the votes in the Senate to pass it. So they've slipped it into this agreement, and it will be ratified thusly.
Yeah, it's a kind of a Trojan horse, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And it also involves sustainable development under the United Nations. It says so many times, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, that kind of thing. The Council on Foreign Relations, of course, thinks it's the greatest thing since sliced bread.
That should worry everybody if they like it.
Yeah, and the thing is that it's interesting that there's no one, absolutely no one, who criticizes its negotiator, Robert Lighthizer. I mean, everybody thinks this guy is great. Well, he's a 20-year veteran of the Council on Foreign Relations, the New World Order building organization. I think Donald Trump has just simply listened to this man and never read the full agreement. I don't think he walked into the Oval Office one day and says, well, I think I'll sit down and read this approaching 3,000-page agreement and see what's really in it.
Well, they're looking at the short-term things. And really what we're doing is we're selling out our inheritance for a bowl of porridge. Because we say, look, we're already seeing positive effects from the provisions of the automotive content mandates and so forth. So we want to bring auto factory workers' jobs here to the United States and have that favorable. We want to help out the dairy industry. And all that stuff is commendable, and it's great to do that. But that could always be done under a bilateral trade agreement. President Trump has always been wise enough to talk about doing bilateral trade agreements in the past, and yet this is a multilateral trade agreement, and it has big sovereignty issues. But I don't know that President Trump is looking beyond the positive things that they threw in there to get this through Congress.
I don't think so either, because in every other aspect, it goes against his America First agenda. It sets up a free trade commission, for instance, which will bypass everybody in the future. In other words, bypass Congress. Now, the Constitution says that Congress shall regulate trade between us and foreign nations, and yet this particular agreement takes that out of the hands of the Congress, and by taking it out of the hands of the Congress, takes it out of the hands of the American people.
You know, one of the things in one of the New American articles they pointed out, it talks about regulatory policy. We should be concerned about that. I mean, if you don't want Washington setting the rules of commerce and trade for every detail of our lives, then you probably don't want some unelected tribunal doing it for us either. But the thing that really stuck out to me when I looked at this was the fact that they set aside Mexico's exclusive ownership of its gasoline and natural gas resources. That's section number 8, recognition of Mexican ownership of hydrocarbons. So why is this necessary, I would ask, if it's not destroying sovereignty? And where is the section that protects our coal and oil and natural gas, or Canada's for that matter?
That's a very interesting observation, because they're setting up what they call a North American Regional Energy Commission, which is going to bring all of the United States energy, and by that I mean gas, oil, electric, atomic, everything like that, under regional control instead of American control. And that's why Mexicans opted out, because they knew this regional thing was being set up.
Yeah, and that's really one of the few things that they've got as part of their economy. So they wanted to hang on to that, and they said, all right, we'll let you hang on to it, but not the U.S. and not Canada. I mean, the very fact that you would have to assert ownership of the natural resources that are in the ground of your country, that means that everything else, all the natural resources, other natural resources of Mexico, and all the natural resources of the U.S. and Canada now fall under the jurisdiction of these people and not under our sovereignty.
That's right. And, just something very fundamental, a good question to ask is it really smart to have a trade agreement of this nature with a socialist Canada and a corrupt Mexico ruled by a Marxist?
Yeah, exactly.
Doesn't make any sense. And by the way, while these things were being signed, the Mexican president was not talking about trade. Trump talked about trade. The Mexican president was talking integration. That's right. Between those two terms.
And when we come back, we got to take a quick break here. When we come back, we're talking to Arthur Thompson. He is the CEO of the John Birch Society. More than anybody else, they have understood the pattern of how the Council on Foreign Relations and these other globalist organizations are incrementally moving us to a global governance. And you better pay attention to the details of this, because the devil is in these details. And we're going to talk about the details, the many different aspects of this agreement when we come back. Stay with us. I want to remind you of the sales that we have at InfoWars, because the products that we sell at InfoWarsStore.com are what fund this program, what fund my program in the morning, War Room in the afternoon, everything that we do, all the reporters that we just had in Virginia at that rally, to show you the size and how peaceful the crowd was there, because we've got the mainstream media lying about it beforehand, lying about it still. And so it's very important that you have an alternative free press that can give you the story. And that's why they have worked so hard to shut us down. But what we run off of are the products that we sell at InfoWarsStore.com, and we try to make that a win-win situation for you. We've got X2 Nascent Iodine has been sold out for weeks, but it's now back in stock and 40% off. We also have our Tri-Iodine. That's our Survival Shield X3 Nascent Iodine. That is also in stock, and it is 40% off. Or you can get the two of them together, because they do work together. You can get that 50% off and get free shipping. As a matter of fact, take a look at the product reviews that are on InfoWarsStore.com. For example, for Survival Shield X2 Nascent Iodine, one person gave it 5 stars, said, I can't even believe what this combined with Super Male Vitality has done for me. It's like getting blasted with those heart restarting paddles in the hospital. Another person said, this stuff is powerful. I had no idea how essential iodine was until I started taking this stuff. I've had brain fog since I was a teen. I take 3 drops of this every morning, and the mental clarity I get is unreal, not to mention the energy. And we call it nutraceuticals because it's made from natural nutrients. It's safe, it's effective, and now we got many of these products that are deeply discounted. We have also the Clean and Boost Yourself in 2020 special. We have 4 products together. We have Lung Cleanse Plus. We have Winter Sun, which is our vitamin D3. And we have Immune Gargle, Pollen Block, and Myco ZX Plus. You can get all of those together, and you can save 50% off at InfoWarsStore.com. Very vital for this operation. If you don't buy these products, we will not be here. That's the way to make this go away, is if you don't support these products. And we really do need, at this time, your support. We've had a lot of increase in terms of our viewership, but right now, after Christmas, we've had a big drop-off in sales. So we really do need your support at InfoWarsStore.com, and we've got a lot of great products there at great prices to support your health.
Keeping us funded is paramount. And we built our own servers. We got our own backup systems. We got all sorts of things. Show that when they try this stuff on us, when they set off a nuke or release a bioweapon or kill the president, God forbid, that we're there to counter them, because they're going to try to kill everything when they make that move, but they're not in total control. So they don't want us, if they try a coup on the president, to be faithful to the Republic and be on air. So everyone tell folks that the internet kill switch is being implemented selectively. They're testing the internet kill switch to see our response. Get the live feed out. Maximum red alert. They've been testing and pushing to see if you ever wake up, and now it's gone just exponential means exponential. You understand? And it goes exponential right up from there. This is order of magnitude. Pegging the line, jamming it through the side, fire coming out of the control panels, okay?
I think it's Alex Jones calling.
On screen. Stabilize. Emergency reserve.
But here's the good news, chumps. You think you're going to assassinate Trump or shut down the independent media and bully a bunch of us into going along with you? I wouldn't be surprised if they blow Trump's head off today, okay? I mean, I'm just saying, red freaking alert with all the signs and the stuff we've got going on. Watch your six. And I tell everybody, I've never said this. Everybody better start carrying firearms right now defensively. Watch your six, patriots. The globalists are testing.
You're listening to The David Knight Show.
Welcome back. Yeah, it is a plan for global domination. We've had the UN Agenda 21. Sometime in the 21st century, they're basically going to kick us off of the land, concentrate us into a few urban areas. They got more specific about it with the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainability because, you know, these people are good at what they do. That should worry us quite a bit. You know, these people are very accomplished. And if you're going to accomplish something, you always stick a specific date on it at the same time. You know, because if you've got a goal and you don't have a date, it's just a wish, isn't it? And that's what I was always told, and that's really is true. And so they've got a date certain, 2030. And it also, worryingly enough, coincides with the fourth turning trend that has been identified by Strauss and Howe in their book of the same name, same people who looked at a generational view of history, named the millennial group and so forth, the millennial generation. And this is all coinciding. They know, just like Strauss and Howe do, they know that about every 70 to 80 years we have a major structural change in society, and that is happening, and they want to make sure that it's going to change in their way. To lock us into the smart cities. A part of that, of course, is setting up the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Transatlantic Trade Agreement, the World Trade Organization. They would create these regional areas, and then they would eventually consolidate these three regional areas into a global governance, and that's where NAFTA came in. And President Trump looked at this and said, well, these are really bad trade deals. Get me a better trade deal. Unfortunately, the trade rep that he's got, Leitzinger, is a part of this globalist organization. And although we've got some good trade changes in this in terms of automobile manufacturing and dairy and stuff like that, this is just a sugar fix. It's going to go away, and we're going to be left with all of the bones of the NAFTA sovereignty stealing agreement. So I've been talking to Arthur Thompson, CEO of the John Birch Society, about how dangerous this is. And I wanted to get into some of the details of this, Mr. Thompson, because we have the New American publication of the John Birch Society has gone into detail. You can see the entire 2,300-page agreement. It's not a free trade agreement. It is a prescription for control of every detail of our national life. I'm looking at the different topics here: financial services, telecommunications, digital trade, intellectual property, state-owned enterprises, labor, environment, regulatory practices, dispute settlement, macroeconomic policies, and exchange rates. I mean, they have they're giving themselves control over everything, aren't they?
Yes, they are. And it's difficult to discuss the details sometimes because you kind of have your head nod off into into boredom when you get involved in that sort of thing. I would suggest that if people really want to dig down into it, that they go to jbs.org and go to our action projects and go into the USMCA, and we've got the whole thing outlined ad nauseum at that site. The thing is that, like you so well put, we may be getting some fair deals right now, but that can all change because it's going to be out of our hands with this Free Trade Commission. They can change this thing without going back to Congress. They can change it any way they wish. And that's a serious problem on into the future.
That's right. If we get into these multilateral supranational organizations, then nothing is nailed down. It is a living agreement, and the people that are going to be setting this, that's the key thing for people to understand. The people that are going to be setting this is going to be some supranational organization that doesn't report to you, that you're not going to have any control over. You're not even going to understand why you're getting poor.
Yeah, and the thing is that back in 1955, a very astute gentleman, Dr. Lewis Lloyd, wrote a book called Tariffs, the Case for Protectionism, and he was always for free trade. And then he started to really examine the issue and realize that there really isn't what we would call free trade in the minds of those of us who hear those two words, that it's something quite different. In fact, Karl Marx, in a speech in Brussels in January 9th of 1848, said he was for free trade because it breaks down old nationalities. In other words, it creates a whole new social system. And Lloyd outlined in his book the 8 things that had to be accomplished to have real free trade. He said taxes must be comparable. Secondly, a single monetary system must be in use. 3, there must be uniform business laws. 4, similar business ethics must prevail. 5, there must be uniform wage rates. 6, maximum labor mobility must exist across borders. Think about that one for a second. 7, there must be freedom from the threat of war. And 8, all the above would have to be enforced by a world government. And that is really where this USMCA is going to be taking us, gradually forming a North American Union that the Mexican government has always wanted since the days of Vicente Fox. There hasn't been a single president of Mexico since Vicente Fox who hasn't called for the integration of the United States and Mexico and Canada into a single government.
Well, you know, what you were saying, Mr. Thompson, was we look at what's required with this. We can see that from our own history. You know, America was a free trade zone. Yeah. We had tariffs at the border. And if you look at Thomas Jefferson's second inaugural address, he said, we're happy that we have, reduced useless offices and so forth. And we have we've eliminated all internal taxation so that no farmer, no laborer, no mechanic knows the tax man. They funded the government off of tariffs. But within America, we had a free trade zone. But in order, as you pointed out, in order to have that happen, you've got to have a common legal system. You have to have a common government and so forth. So if you want to have global free trade, it requires a global government.
That's right. And the whole term free trade is ridiculous because it is a masterstroke, because most people think of free trade and, oh, yeah, that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. But once government gets involved with its taxes, tariffs, imports, exports, banking laws, et cetera, it's no longer free trade. It doesn't exist. There's only one form of free trade that exists in the world today. It's called smuggling.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, I think it's also interesting that when we got away from that, that was the way that America was founded. We had free trade within our borders, and we had tariffs around the perimeter. And that changed when we created the Federal Reserve. We created the income tax. The taxation then moved internal. And they started the banks who wanted to have a global governance and a global trade. They were the ones who removed the trade restrictions, and then they put taxes on us internally.
Yes, and the individual who sold that to Wilson was Edward Mendel House, that once they got the income tax involved, then they started to cut back on tariffs as the means of funding, and having the income tax as the primary means of funding the federal government.
Yes, exactly. But, just going down through this thing, I mean, the idea that you're going to have the USMCA set regulatory practices for us. We've already got the problem that we've got now in Washington is the fact that we are increasingly ruled by bureaucrats who are not elected, who are not accountable, and they're making the rules. It's kind of like what Nancy Pelosi said. She said, well, we got to pass it to find out what's in it. And she was actually telling the truth for once, because they don't do the details. They ship it over, or they create a new bureaucracy, and that new bureaucracy sets the details and then constantly changes those. And so we not only have now taxation without representation, but we have regulation without representation in Washington. But this moves it to the international level, where you're going to have now a cadre of international bureaucrats and a tribunal and so forth. They're going to be able to set regulatory practices. They're going to be able to make environmental law, which is, we know what that's going to look like. We can take a look at the UN. They're the ones who are pushing environmentalism as a global problem so that they can have a global solution, a global government, a global tax, and so forth.
Yes, and a good example of what we're facing is the European Union. The European Union imposes regulations on those countries over there to the detriment of the people and the economy. Poland, for instance, which I know a little bit about, for one aspect that the EU has done is impose a carbon tax on Polish coal, which means they can't even afford their own coal. They have to import it from Russia.
That's right. Yeah, and just look at how difficult it was for the UK to get out of Brexit. I mean, they're still not out. They said they're getting out on Friday, but we're going to talk about that and how these trade agreements metamorphosize into closer political control, and it's already a part of this agreement, just like it was the European Union. When we come back, one more segment with Arthur Thompson. Stay with us.
This time of... Samuel, thanks for calling.
Alex, it's a pleasure to talk to you. Hello. Alex, if I can just quickly, InfoWarsStore.com, I want to thank you for Pollen Block. It's amazing. I've used so many different antihistamines over the years because I get really bad hay fever. And the antihistamines sometimes work, sometimes don't, but they never quite work fully. They don't block all of the symptoms. They just kind of dry you up, or at least that's what they do for me, if they work at all. But Pollen Block, it works. It stops everything. I don't get the itchy eyes. I'm not sneezing, and I don't get the irritation. It is amazing.
This is a known patent out of France. You have to pay for the patent, where they just discovered that if you feed a certain secret diet to quail and then you get their eggs, it creates this incredible antihistamine of a certain type of quail. How fast did it take for Pollen Block to kick in for you?
It's pretty much straight away. You know, in maybe 10 minutes, maybe 20 minutes. It just works. The antihistamines, the pharmaceutical products, I find that with those, I can't take them until I start getting symptoms, and even then, they might not kick in for half an hour, or they might not kick in at all, depending on the day. Pollen Block works every single time.
Well, that's the great part about this, and for whatever reason, it's this, France discovered it like 50 years ago. It's still got to be, even in this region of France, it's very complex. They don't even know why, but they think it's the pollen in the area, the dust, what the quail are eating. Then they just produce in the eggs whatever this essence is that just turns the histamine response off. I go out and I do market research, and I say, what are the best-selling products in the world, and what have the best reviews in the world? And then what do people in America not know that in Japan or in Europe or in Russia or in Africa or in Latin America is already a bestseller? Because a lot of stuff never gets here for some reason. And in Europe and in Russia and in Canada, there are a lot of brands of this stuff with the quail eggs. It's not here. So we just made a souped-up version of it and discounted it, and it's Pollen Block. InfoWarsStore.com or 888-253-3139.
You're listening to The David Knight Show. Using free speech to free minds. This is The David Knight Show.
And we're talking to Arthur Thompson. He is the CEO of the John Birch Society. You can find them at jbs.org. You can also find them on Twitter at @the_JBS. And as we're going to break, Mr. Thompson, you made the great analogy of the problems that we have seen with the European Union and how we're going to go down that same path with USMCA. The good things that are in it are just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, and we're taking a look at the structural problems of this ship, this cruise ship that we've created here. And we can already see how that's kind of played out in the European Union, as I think it was Nigel Farage who pointed out. You've got bureaucrats in Brussels who are telling British fishermen how much they can fish in their own territorial waters. But of course, it wasn't their territorial waters after they joined the European Union, was it?
The thing is that they sell all of these things on the idea of a good economy and that sort of thing. But, you know, you can always recover from a loss of jobs and economy if you're free, but you can't recover your sovereignty and independence if you're tied up into these international agreements. It's really a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, and we saw how this worked with the European Union. You know, first they had the treaty to have a common market, and then they got closer and closer economic ties, and they got a common currency. And then they were saying, well, now we have to have even more political control of what's going on here. I mean, we've had talk in the past about even changing the currency eventually under NAFTA, but we've actually had think tanks proposing the idea that we would have common security for all three countries, Canada, the U.S., and Mexico, and that we would have a common border around those three countries and that the security would be run by Department of Homeland Security. They've gotten into all these details. I mean, we're talking about creating one common bloc here, aren't we?
Yes, we are. And with these new agreements that were added, courtesy of Nancy Pelosi and company, we are going to, whether we have a wall or not have a wall, we are not going to have control over our own borders under this condition once this is fully in place, because it gives control to this Free Trade Commission of how many people can cross the borders looking for work.
And she's already said that. She said, look, we just have one common community. It just happens to have a line drawn through it. And I said, as she mentioned that, I said, again, she's being honest with us. She's telling us, I don't see the difference between the U.S. and Mexico as any different than the border between Texas and Oklahoma.
Yeah. It's a serious problem. It is interesting, as you point out. They will tell you to your face what they're doing, but it is so incredulous, people can't believe what they're saying. Oh, they don't really mean that, you know.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. It's kind of like the Epstein stuff, right? Nobody can believe this because it's just too far over the top. When we look at telecommunications, for example, I know a lot of people are concerned about not only the health effects, but also the surveillance and privacy issues of 5G. But of course, you know, if we're going to have telecommunications mandates from a international body, a trade body, they're going to put economic development over any of our concerns about health and privacy and surveillance, aren't they, when it comes to 5G?
Yes, and not only that, but as you have experienced, as we have experienced, you know, we're turning control of all of this over from private enterprise to government. Where they're going to censor us.
Yes. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they've asserted through a private-public partnership total control over the internet. That's why I call it, it's not really we ought to stop calling it the military-industrial complex. Let's just call it the military surveillance complex, because that's really what it's become. And it's going to facilitate that.
And one of the things, too, that we have to, you know, regrettably address is that the Republicans are not much better than the Democrats in all of this.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
For instance, all the talk about getting rid of NAFTA immediately segued into replacing NAFTA.
Yes.
And in none of these discussions amongst them, and I could list a litany of conservative pundits that we all would find familiar to ourselves, never one of them did they mention the sovereignty aspect and the independence of the American people in the Constitution. It was all a better deal.
If you want to know about that side of it, you got to go to jbs.org. Thank you so much, Mr. Thompson. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
You bet.
This is Savannah Hernandez for Action 7 News. We had a long day here in Richmond, Virginia, covering the gun rights rally.